Hello, everyone. I'm glad you're here. Please like and subscribe so I can tell more interesting stories. Now let's get started. There was a moment right before the crash where everything slowed down. You know that feeling when time stretches. It's like the world takes one long, deep breath. That's what it felt like at 3:34 p.m. on October 13th, 1972, as our Fairchild FH-227D started dropping through the clouds and into hell. I remember gripping the armrest like it owed me money. I remember someone in the back yelling, "Dios mío," and the captain's voice suddenly cutting off. Then metal shrieked like it had feelings. The fuselage split like a soda can under a boot. And then the worst part, nothing. Just a blinding spray of snow, the crunch of steel on ice, and a silence so dense it felt like it was choking me. When I came to, my head was ringing like a church bell. I could feel the cold first crawling up my spine like a thief. Everything was white. Not the gentle Christmas snow kind. This was sharp, ruthless, uninvited. My friend Enrique was next to me, his face frozen with blood trailing from his temple. Some of us were still strapped in our seats. Others weren't so lucky. The tail was gone. The wings, too. We were in the middle of the Andes on a glacier at over 11,000 feet, surrounded by knife-blade mountains that made the Rockies look like molehills. And we had just crash-landed into one of the most unforgiving places on Earth. I crawled out of the wreckage, or maybe the wreckage spat me out. I can't remember. What I do remember is the wind. It wasn't a breeze. It was a voice. It whispered things. Not words, but feelings. Loneliness. Abandonment. Hunger, maybe. Weird, right? Anyway, we weren't dead. Not yet. There were 45 of us on board. Friends, teammates, a few family members. We were a rugby team from Montevideo, Uruguay, the old Christians club. We were headed to Chile for a match. And now we were stranded in a white nowhere. One guy, Nando Parado, was still unconscious. His skull had fractured. His sister was dead. His mother, too. I didn't tell him that right away. Some truths are better left under ice. We made a sort of base inside the shattered fuselage, stuffed our feet into seat cushions, tore apart upholstery for warmth, used shards of the plane's windows to cut away at whatever was sharp or jagged. One of us had a broken leg. Another was missing teeth. Someone joked, "At least we don't have to pay for baggage claim." It was dark humor. The kind you use when you're not ready to accept you might die surrounded by snowdrifts and dead friends. And here's a historical fact. For you, did you know that this was the deadliest aviation accident in Uruguayan history? No joke. Not the most encouraging stat to have under your belt when you're still hoping the search and rescue teams are on their way. We found a transistor radio still working somehow. We huddled around it like cavemen around a fire, waiting for news of our rescue. But nothing came. Just static and sports scores. Somewhere people were living their lives while we sat on a frozen graveyard, trying to keep hope from cracking like the ice beneath our feet. And here's the thing. Nobody tells you about snow. It's beautiful until it wants you gone. It's cold, yes, but it's also heavy. It can muffle screams. It can bury your past and your future in the same breath. Odd fact. Okay, apparently, some species of frogs can freeze solid and still come back to life when thawed. Sadly, we were not frogs. Historians still debate whether the plane could have been found sooner if the Chilean air search and rescue hadn't initially focused on the wrong area. But hey, hindsight's 2020, especially when you're not the one gnawing on leather shoes to feel full. We tried to keep warm. We took turns watching the mountains, hoping to see a helicopter slice through the clouds. The irony, the bright white fuselage that might have stood out in the jungle, just blended into the snow here, like we were camouflaged in our own coffin. That first night brutal. Temperatures dropped below 30 degrees Celsius. Some of us whispered prayers. Some just cried quietly. I pressed my body against the broken window frame, my breath freezing on the glass. And somewhere in that frozen silence, I started to wonder, what if no one comes? We weren't passengers anymore. We were survivors now. Or at least we were trying. A cold silence settles in. By the second day, the adrenaline had packed its bags and left. That's when the cold stopped being a sensation and became a mindset. You didn't just feel cold, you were cold. Inside and out. It lived in your teeth, behind your eyes, in your bones. And nobody wanted to say it out loud, but we were in deep, deep trouble. We counted the bodies. 5 were dead on impact. By the end of that first night, we'd lost 3 more to their injuries, and we knew deep down that more were coming. There's something horribly intimate about watching someone die, slowly, in a place with no clocks, no calendars. Time stretches like old taffy. It melts and freezes and snaps all in the same breath. Food. We had next to nothing. A couple bottles of wine, a few chocolate bars, some peanuts, a tin of mussels someone's aunt had packed. Imagine that, a tin of mussels at the end of the world. We rationed like monks. A square of chocolate per day. A sip of wine, if that. We talked about cheeseburgers, churros, spaghetti. I once dreamt about licking a stick of butter and woke up with a mouthful of snow. And speaking of dreams, sleep came in tiny fractured doses. You'd drift off in someone's armpit, wake up with your lips blue and your legs numb, and hope your toes were still attached. I made a game of it. Count your toes every morning. If you get to 10, it's a good day. We did what we could. We scraped snow into plastic bottles and waited for it to melt in the sun, if the sun even bothered to show up. We used sunglasses made from cardboard slits to avoid snow blindness. Yeah, that's a thing. And yes, it hurts exactly how it sounds. Odd fact for you. The ancient Romans believed rubbing snow on your face could preserve youth. Let me tell you, after what we went through, I aged 5 years in 5 days. Not quite the fountain of youth they had in mind. Around day 3, we saw a search plane overhead. We screamed. We waved. We held up shiny metal panels and used them to reflect light like desperate, hopeful disco balls. The plane turned. We howled. And then it disappeared. That was the worst part, knowing they saw us and still kept flying. Turns out we were so deep in a snow-covered valley, they thought we were rocks. Just another wrinkle in the Andes. Historically speaking, the Andes Mountains are among the youngest mountain ranges in the world, but you wouldn't know it, by the way. They looked at us like ancient judgmental gods. And there we were, huddled in a broken tin can at their feet, begging for a second chance. We tried to stay organized, assigned daily tasks. One guy became the water guy. Another collected snow. A few of us monitored the radio, praying for something other than static and soccer. We even joked about forming a government. President, Minister of Snow, Secretary of Not Dying. Historians still debate whether we could have hiked out sooner, whether staying put was smart or stupid. But at that moment, moving felt impossible. The mountains stretched higher than we could comprehend. There were no trails, no signs, no promises, just white walls and the occasional cruel whisper of wind. One day, someone said it out loud. What if no one comes? And that was the moment everything shifted. Silence followed. Not the quiet kind, the real kind. The kind that makes your stomach twist because you know something's changed. We held a little funeral, said prayers for the ones who wouldn't wake up. We couldn't bury them, not really. The ground was frozen solid, so we arranged the bodies outside carefully, like they were only sleeping. We made crosses from aluminum scraps. Some of us cried, some just stared. Death was starting to feel like a roommate, familiar, present, unavoidable. The days were white and the nights were black. And in between, we waited. That's really what survival is. It's not running through jungles or drinking from vines. It's waiting. Waiting for your stomach to forget it's empty. Waiting for a sound in the distance. Waiting for something to change. And yet, we joked. Humans are weird like that. Humor kept us alive in ways food couldn't. Someone made a fake menu and read it out loud. Today's special grilled penguin with ice-glazed potatoes and invisible wine. We laughed so hard it hurt. I remember once sitting with my friend Roberto watching the sky. He said, "You know this could be worse." I raised an eyebrow. How? He grinned. "You could have been stuck with my family instead of mine." I didn't laugh right away, but when I did, it felt like breathing again. Still, I couldn't shake the thought we were turning into ghosts, not just to the world, but to ourselves. If rescue didn't come soon, we wouldn't just die. We'd vanish. And that terrified me more than the cold. And yet I didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. I think my body was saving the tears for something worse. Something I couldn't name. At night, when the stars came out, they looked close enough to touch. They reminded me of home. Of my sister. Of my favorite dog, of Sundays and soup and summer breezes. I wanted to bottle that feeling and drink it. Just one sip of normal. But normal was gone, and we were still here. The bodies become the answer. There are lines you never think you'll cross. Morality makes sense in the warmth of a kitchen when your belly is full, and your biggest problem is overcooked pasta. But at 11,000 feet, wrapped in seat cushions, and your dead best friend's jacket, lines blur. They don't just blur, they disappear. It didn't happen all at once. We resisted. For days we kept telling ourselves, help is coming. Just one more day. But the radio, our tiny connection to the outside world, had gone quiet. No more search parties, no more hope. On day 9, they officially called off the rescue. We listened to that announcement like a funeral. I didn't move. Nobody did. Just sat there, mouths open, eyes wide, frozen in disbelief. We had been left behind. That night, something broke in me. I couldn't stop thinking about food. Not in the craving sense, more like obsession. I saw sandwiches in the clouds, pizza in the snowdrifts. I swear at one point, I hallucinated my mother offering me a roasted chicken leg. I reached out, hand trembling, and grabbed air. Then came the conversation. The one you never want to have. It was casual at first. Someone said, "The bodies are preserved, like meat in a freezer." Another whispered, "If we don't, we die." It wasn't a decision. It was survival, making itself known. We drew straws. No one wanted to start. Eventually, a few of us did. I was one of them. And I'll never forget that first bite. Let me be clear. It wasn't barbaric. It was sacred, reverent. We weren't monsters. We were friends, eating friends in the most human way imaginable. Not out of malice or madness, but out of love. We whispered apologies. We cried. One guy said grace. Another vomited. Odd fact. There's a tribe in Papua New Guinea that used to practice endocannibalism, eating their dead to honor them. We didn't know that at the time, but somehow it made me feel less alone when I found out later. The taste, I won't describe it. That's not the point. The point is that once you cross that line, something in you changes. Your relationship with the world, with your own body, it's never the same. You become animal, and yet somehow more human. Historically, this wasn't the first time it had happened. The Donner Party in the 1840s did something similar, stuck in the Sierra Nevada mountains. They were vilified. We feared the same fate. Would the world see us as heroes or cannibals? Historians still debate whether our decision was justified or if we should have held out longer. But they weren't there. They didn't hear the stomachs groaning like wounded animals. They didn't wake up next to dead friends every morning. We shared everything equally, even the meals. We rotated. We respected each other's boundaries. Some refused to eat. We didn't judge. But eventually, even they came around. Hunger is patient. It waits. And when it speaks louder than shame. The guilt came in waves. You'd eat, then cry. You'd pray, then chew. One night, I dreamed I was back in Montevideo eating steak with my father. He looked at me and asked, "Is that Roberto?" I woke up screaming. Everyone else did too. We were haunted by our choices, by our own survival. We wrote letters to the families, letters we weren't sure would ever be read. I wrote to Enrique's mother. "I loved your son. He saved my life in more ways than one. I hope you understand." I didn't finish it. I didn't know how. The cold didn't care. It pressed in from all sides like a reminder, no matter what you've done to survive, the mountain still wants you dead. It's not personal. It's just how it is. At some point, a strange peace settled over us. Routine helped. Wake up, melt snow, talk nonsense, disassociate, eat, cry, sleep, repeat. We stopped hoping for helicopters. We stopped counting days. I remember looking at my own reflection in a piece of metal and not recognizing the face. My cheeks were sunken. My eyes were hollow. I looked like I'd been carved out of wax, or like one of those old black and white photos you find in a museum, the ones that haunt you because they're too quiet. One guy found a deck of cards. We played poker using pebbles as currency. I bet all my money on a pair of twos. Lost big. We laughed. Not because it was funny, but because if we didn't, we'd break. Snowstorms came and went. The wind howled like it was angry we were still here. Some nights I thought about walking into it, just leaving, disappearing into the white, letting the mountain win. But something kept me tethered. Maybe it was my father's voice in my head. Maybe it was rage. Maybe it was the need to see Montevideo one more time. We talked about the future like it was fiction. When I get home, I'm never eating salad again. First thing I do, hot shower and a steak as big as my head. But deep down, none of us believed we'd make it. The Andes weren't just mountains anymore. They were a gate, and we were locked in. So we waited, and ate, and hoped, and hated ourselves, and loved each other harder than we ever had before. Because, in the end, we weren't just surviving. We were bearing witness to each other, to the pain, to the brutal, unbearable cost of staying alive. The avalanche doesn't care. There was something almost peaceful about that night. The wind had died down. The stars were out sprinkled like sugar over the mountains. We were all packed in tight inside the fuselage, our little frozen womb, breathing in each other's warmth, talking about nonsense to keep the dark at bay. And then the mountain moved. There was no warning, no distant rumble like in the movies, just a sudden, deafening crack, and the ceiling dropped like a hammer. In less than 5 seconds, snow poured into the fuselage like a silent ocean swallowing everything. I didn't have time to scream. None of us did. I just remember being slammed backward, then weight-crushing, suffocating weight. pinning me down. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. It was like drowning in cold cement. And in that moment, I thought, so this is it. This is how I die. But I didn't. I came to, with a mouthful of frozen air and someone's elbow jammed into my side. It was dark, pitch black. I couldn't hear anything at first, except my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then faint voices, muffled screams, a groan. We were buried, completely. The avalanche had sealed the fuselage shut. 8 of us were dead, just like that. Just like a cruel joke told by the mountain itself. I was trapped for hours. Couldn't move my legs. Couldn't tell whose hand I was holding. At one point, I thought I was hallucinating when I heard a voice next to me whisper, "I can't feel my toes." I replied, "Lucky you. I can feel mine and they're mad at me." We eventually dug our way out, with bare hands, chunks of metal, and whatever determination hadn't been crushed along with our ribs. We clawed through snow and debris, breathing through tiny air pockets, whispering prayers to saints we hadn't spoken to in years. One of the survivors, Carlitos, had been asleep next to the wall. He didn't make it. I remember pulling snow off his face and realizing he was frozen in a half smile. It gutted me in a way I didn't know was possible. The worst part, the snow stayed. We couldn't move the bodies out. The avalanche had filled the back of the fuselage like a tomb. So we slept beside them, ate beside them, dreamed beside them. No way around it. Odd fact. There's a breed of octopus that amputates its own arms when under extreme stress. Sometimes, I think we did something similar. Amputated parts of our souls just to survive that night. That avalanche changed everything. Before, we were hopeful, at least in theory. After, we understood we were nothing more than guests in a place that wanted us gone. The mountain had stopped being indifferent. Now it was hostile. Historically, avalanches in the Andes kill more mountaineers than any other hazard. Not altitude sickness, not frostbite, just plain snow with gravity and no conscience. And we'd just survived one. Barely. We couldn't use the back of the fuselage anymore. So we rearranged sleeping upright, huddled like sardines, shivering ourselves into early arthritis. And still we joked. One guy said, "Well, at least we don't have to worry about overpopulation in here anymore." It was dark. So dark. But we laughed. Not because it was funny, but because laughter is the last thing death understands. Historians still debate whether the avalanche might have been triggered by our own voices echoing through the valley. Or maybe the weight of recent snowfall. Maybe the mountain just got bored and wanted to remind us who was boss. We stopped keeping track of time. Days blurred. Nights dragged. I remember once sleeping for what felt like 10 hours only to wake up and find the sun hadn't even risen. That's the cruelty of high-altitude survival. Time becomes your enemy. We tried to keep busy, built makeshift snow walls, reinforced the front of the fuselage, shared stories about our families. I told a story about how I once got caught cheating on a math test, and the teacher just shook his head and said, "You're lucky, charm, not brains." It made everyone laugh, probably harder than it deserved. But deep inside, the panic simmered. What if another avalanche comes? What if this is just a preview? What if we don't make it? I started having dreams, vivid ones, of warmth, fireplaces, bread baking, my dog barking. Then I'd wake up with my lips split from the cold and the taste of frozen meat in my mouth. The contrast was enough to make you scream if your throat had the strength. We were deteriorating, physically, mentally, spiritually. The frostbite was getting worse. Sores opened up. Teeth chattered constantly. I couldn't feel my fingers half the time. One guy lost 2 toes. Another started mumbling nonsense. We joked that he was talking to the mountain, and maybe he was. And through all this, one thought started to root itself in my head. We had to get out. No one was coming. Not anymore. The avalanche had sealed the deal. That was the night Nando Parado finally said it out loud. We walk out. Or we die here. It sounded like madness. But madness was starting to sound like a plan. We began to prepare, slowly, quietly, whispering plans in the dark. Who was strong enough? Who could navigate? Who still believed in something beyond these cursed mountains? Because now, the mountain wasn't just our enemy. It was our test. And maybe, just maybe, we were ready to take it on. One shot at the impossible. You ever pack for a walk, knowing you might not come back? That was the mood when Nando, Roberto, and I got ready. There wasn't a dramatic speech or slow-motion montage. Just 3 guys, duct-taped boots, half a chocolate bar, and a desperate kind of silence. We'd talked it over for days, studied the terrain, such as it was, with no map, no compass, and 0 sense of direction. But we figured south was the best bet. Or maybe west. We weren't explorers. We were rugby players who'd watched a few nature documentaries and hoped for the best. What finally pushed us to go simple. We were out of food, out of stories, and out of faces we hadn't buried. We had one shot, one direction, one sleeping bag we'd sewn from airplane insulation and scavenged seat covers. It was barely enough for one person. We took turns at night, like a sad version of musical chairs. Odd fact. The sleeping bag we made was reportedly the first mountaineering bag ever home-sewn at 11,000 feet. Not a brag, just a desperate world record. We set off on December 12th, 60 days after the crash. The others stood by the fuselage as we left. No one said goodbye. They didn't want to admit we might not return, and maybe we didn't want to admit it either. I remember glancing back once, just once. Then the mountain swallowed them from view. We climbed like drunk ants. Every step felt like a betrayal to our lungs. Altitude's a cruel companion. It makes you feel lazy, then punishes you when you rest. My feet were numb. Roberto's lips cracked so badly they bled every time he smiled. So he stopped smiling. We rationed snow. Ate little, spoke less. Nights were brutal. We dug shallow holes in the snow and buried ourselves in them like stubborn ghosts. That sleeping bag lifesaver, literally. The worst part wasn't the pain. It was the endless white. No landmarks, no signs. Just ridge after ridge after ridge. And at every peak, we'd stare out and hope to see green or brown or anything but more snow. Instead, the mountains just kept multiplying like a bad math problem. Historically, the Andes Mountains span 7 countries and stretch over 7,000 kilometers. And in those endless peaks, a person might as well be an ant on a sugar cube. We passed the remains of the tail section on day 2. Bodies still inside. We found luggage, 2 dry clothes, chocolate bars, a bottle of rum. Treasure. We took what we could, left a note, said a prayer, then kept walking. On the 4th day, Roberto nearly gave up, collapsed in the snow face down. "Leave me," he whispered, dramatic like a telenovela. I rolled him over, slapped his face, and said, "Not today, Hamlet." He laughed once, then vomited, close enough to motivation. By day 6, the mountain started whispering again. Not literally, but you start hearing things after enough hunger. Voices, mostly. I swore I heard my father calling my name. Roberto said he heard music accordions specifically. I told him that was the worst hallucination of all. Historians still debate whether we should have turned left instead of right at a certain fork. Some argue we could have reached help faster. But when you're up there starving and guessing every decision feels like spinning a roulette wheel blindfolded. On day 7, we found a patch of green. Real, living green. Grass, bushes, a bird even. We cried. I knelt and kissed the ground like it was holy. And in that moment, I believed in everything God, ghosts, even luck. Then down in the valley we saw a river, and on the other side, cows. Actual cows. Grazing like nothing in the world was wrong. But no people. We followed the river for a day, then another. We shouted, built signal fires. Nothing. Just the occasional startled animal giving us the side eye like we'd interrupted their nap. On the 9th day, we spotted a man. Across the river. A figure dark against the green. He was riding a horse flanked by mules bundled up against the wind. We screamed. We waved. He looked confused. Probably thought we were lunatics. And to be fair, we kind of were. He shouted something. We shouted back. Language failed. He didn't understand our accent, and we couldn't stop crying long enough to make sense. So, we wrote a note, wrapped it around a rock, tossed it across the river. It read, "We are survivors of the plane crash. Please help us. We are starving." He nodded, gave us a thumbs up, rode off. And in that moment, we collapsed. All the tension, all the fear, all the pain. It just evaporated, like steam from snow. We didn't know who he was or where he was going. But someone knew now. Someone saw us. Odd detail, that muleteer's name was Sergio Catalan, and he'd never heard of the crash. He thought we were lost hikers or maybe runaway monks. He returned the next day with bread, cheese, and help. Actual help. I took one bite of that bread, and it tasted like life. We were going home. The mountains finally speak back. When you've lived with death in your sleeping bag for over 2 months, the sound of a helicopter is the loudest, most sacred sound on earth. It's not just mechanical. It's biblical. The day after Sergio Catalan rode off, we waited in stunned disbelief. I mean, think about it. We'd survived a plane crash, buried friends in snow, eaten the unthinkable, and climbed through a frozen hell. And now, we were just supposed to wait. We barely slept that night. Every crack of a branch sounded like salvation. Every gust of wind brought hope and dread in equal measure. I stared into the dark trees, half expecting it was all a dream, that I'd wake up in the fuselage again, surrounded by ghostly white. But morning came, and with it a sound, low, rhythmic, a thudding that echoed through the valley like a heartbeat. The kind of sound that doesn't belong in nature. The kind that carries promises. We ran toward it, stumbling, screaming, waving our arms like maniacs. And there it was. A green helicopter, hovering like a miracle, with spinning blades and wide eyes staring back at us. They didn't land, too rough. But they circled. They saw us. And just like that, the Andes stopped being silent. By the next day, rescue teams had reached the fuselage, back where the others were still waiting. Nando and I were flown out first, our bodies half frozen, our brains half broken. They strapped us in like fragile cargo and lifted us away. I looked down at the white expanse as it shrank beneath us. It didn't feel real. Part of me still expected to wake up on the snow tongue, frozen to the fuselage wall. Someone nudging me. "Hey, it's your turn to melt snow." But the helicopter kept going, and below the Andes finally let us go. Odd fact, helicopters used in the rescue were lightweight Bell UH-1s, nicknamed Hueys, the same model used in Vietnam. And now they were flying over the Andes, not into war, but into redemption. Back in civilization, everything was noise. Flash bulbs, reporters, hands grabbing mouths asking questions. How did you survive? What did you eat? Are you heroes? We didn't answer. Not really. We were still somewhere between mountains and men. Our bodies were present, but our minds were still up there, frozen in time, and guilt, and silence. The hospital in San Fernando felt like a dream. Beds, blankets, warm soup. I cried when someone handed me a pair of socks. Real socks. Not airplane fabric stitched together with desperation. We met with the other survivors. One by one, the helicopters brought them down. Some limped. Some smiled. Some couldn't speak at all. But we were together. And that alone felt like enough. Then came the questions. The world had moved on. But now it wanted our story. They wanted to know what we did up there, how we lived, and more importantly, what we ate. That word, cannibalism, it stung. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't right either. Reporters whispered it like a slur. Commentators speculated with raised eyebrows. Would you eat human flesh to survive? Historians still debate whether we should have admitted it so soon, whether silence would have protected us. But we told the truth. All of it. Because shame has no place in survival. Not when you've held your friend's frozen hand and whispered, "I'm sorry," through chattering teeth. There were protests, accusations. One paper ran a headline, "Andes survivors admit to eating dead," as if we'd confessed a crime, as if staying alive required apology. But you know what? We didn't care. Not really. We'd walk through death and back. No journalist could take that away. Nando told his story to the Chilean president himself. Said it straight. Calm. No drama. Just fact. We did what we had to do. We honored them. We survived. The families were kinder than we expected. Enrique's mother hugged me. She said, "I'm glad you're alive. I know he would be too." And just like that, my knees gave out. Because forgiveness is heavier than guilt. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's handed to you freely. We spent weeks in recovery. Physically, we were healing. But mentally, that would take years. Still does, honestly. One night, while I lay in a real bed, I couldn't sleep. I got up, opened the window, and stared at the mountains in the distance. Even from miles away, they still looked big, still looked hungry. I whispered, "You didn't win." Odd fact. There's a monastery in the Himalayas where monks pray for mountain spirits, not to worship them, but to appease them. I get it now. As the media storm calmed, we began returning home. Uruguay welcomed us like we were astronauts returning from the moon. Banners, bands, cameras, but none of that mattered as much as my father's hug. The man didn't cry often. That day he did. In private, we formed a bond that never broke. A brotherhood sealed not by blood, but by snow, silence, and survival. We still meet. Every year. We toast the dead. We laugh. We cry. Sometimes we sit in silence and it's not awkward at all. Because the mountains gave us something we never expected. Not just pain or loss or trauma, but clarity. We learned what matters, who we are, what we're capable of. And somehow, through it all, we found a way to live again. We were the miracle. They called us the miracle of the Andes. But I don't think that's quite right. A miracle implies magic. Something divine. Something clean. What we lived through wasn't clean. It was ragged and filthy and painful and raw. There was no angel guiding us out of the mountains, just broken boys with frost-bitten toes, chapped lips, and a stubborn refusal to die. Still, when I stepped off the plane, back in Montevideo, I could feel the weight of that word, miracle, hanging in the air like perfume. The crowd looked at us like we were saints. heroes. But if they had seen us up there, if they had watched us weep beside the bodies of our friends, if they had tasted what we tasted, I don't know if they would have cheered the same way. I smiled, for the cameras shook hands, nodded politely. But inside, I was still there, kneeling in the snow, whispering apologies over a frozen chest cavity. For months, after I had dreams. Not nightmares, just memories that refused to fade. The sound of snow cracking, the way flesh tears when it's frozen, the look on Roberto's face when he thought the mountains were God's punishment for something we couldn't name. And still, we lived. Some survivors spoke out immediately. Others stayed silent. Some found religion. Some lost it. Some went back to playing rugby. Others never touched a ball again. We each carried the mountain differently. Odd fact. One of us, Eduardo Strauch, became a painter after the rescue. His work is surreal, full of mountains and fragmented bodies. If you've ever seen trauma trapped in color, it's that. For a while, I couldn't be near snow, couldn't even look at a photo of the Andes. But time softens even the sharpest edges. Eventually, I returned. We all did together. One last visit, one last goodbye. We stood at the crash site, surrounded by wind and ghosts. The fuselage was gone, scavenged long ago, but the bones were still there. The makeshift grave, the cross, the silence. It was peaceful and heavy. We lit candles, said names out loud, names we hadn't dared say in years. And for a moment, the air felt warm. That's when it hit me. Survival isn't just about living. It's about remembering. Historians still debate whether we should have ever gone public with the full story, whether the world was ready to hear it. But we decided it wasn't our job to protect people from the truth, because we weren't the miracle. The miracle was friendship. The miracle was forgiveness. The miracle was looking death in the eye again and again and choosing each other anyway. You don't get to come out of something like that unchanged. You don't get to pretend it didn't happen. But you do get to decide how it shapes you. Me, I became quieter, more patient. I hug people longer. I eat slower. I don't leave things unsaid. And when people ask what it was like, I don't give them the Hollywood version. I tell them the real one. It was brutal. It was ugly. It was sacred. It was us. 45 boarded that plane. 16 came home. And not a day goes by that I don't feel the weight of both numbers. If you ever find yourself near the Andes, listen closely. Not to the wind or the snow, but to the silence in between. That's where we were. That's where we still are. We weren't the miracle. We were what was left behind after the miracle had no choice but to leave. So here we are. You've heard the story, the full story. Not the magazine headlines, not the movie script, just a broken voice whispering what it meant to come back from the edge. I don't expect you to understand it all. Honestly, I don't think we ever fully did either. Some experiences aren't meant to be sorted into tidy boxes. They live with you, quietly, constantly. Sometimes they knock. Sometimes they just sit in the corner watching. Survival, real survival, isn't glamorous. It's not triumph. It's trembling. It's making 100 little decisions in the dark, knowing any one of them might be your last. And somehow choosing to keep going anyway. The Andes didn't take our lives, but they took other things. Pieces of us that we'll never get back. Smiles that used to come easy. Sleep that used to be restful. Laughter that didn't feel borrowed. But they gave us something too. Perspective. Love. The kind of bond that doesn't break when tested, only deepens. So if you take anything from our story, let it be this. We are all more fragile than we think, but also far stronger than we imagine. And sometimes, when the world turns cold and the path disappears under snow, the only thing that keeps you moving is the person beside you, breathing, bleeding, hoping with you. That's the real miracle. Thank you for walking through this with me, for listening, for remembering. Now, close your eyes. The snow is quiet again, and the mountain has finally let us sleep.